The last time we recited Yizkor was October 7th. I can hear the sighs. It's hard to believe. We asked that day, Yizkor Elohim, may God remember them, before we knew very much at all about what had happened. Since we only recite Yizkor 4 times a year, Yom Kippur and on the 3 pilgrimage festivals, today is our first chance since that shocking day to reflect and remember together at Yizkor. We will mourn our close loved ones, as we always do, and I also invite us to think about our losses in a broader context. Here is some of what I bring to Yizkor today. I was raised in a Holocaust survivor family. There are so many whom I never knew, so I have spent a lot of time learning their stories and looking at their photographs. And at this point, their faces inhabit my memories as if I knew them, as if we had actually been alive at the same time, although we, of course, weren't. One photograph of my great-grandfather, Bear, around 1927. He posed for a portrait with his wife, Brucha, my great-grandmother, and his delightfully chubby baby, my grandfather. He's wearing a dark suit and tie. He has a mustache and a round, sweet face. And he looks proud of his growing family. His posture is remarkably relaxed. He died 12 years later, when the German authorities ordered all Jewish men ages 16 to 60 to appear at a specific time in a designated place in their small town in Poland. They were led on a death march to the Russian border, which Bear did not survive. Another photograph of my grandfather's sister, Pearl. She's sitting next to the family radio. Her face is scrunched up, laughing like a 9-year-old laughs. I like to imagine she's listening to whoever was the Taylor Swift of 1936. She looks a lot like 9-year-olds we see today, enjoying music. She looks a lot like my grandfather, though I don't think I ever got to see him smile so broadly and so brightly. Pearl lived about 9 more years until she was drowned with several thousand other prisoners of the Stutthof concentration camp, mostly women, in 1945. This was just days before the end of the war. Third photo, my grandfather in 1945, just after liberation. He was 20 years old in a DP camp. I can recognize him. He's standing and looking sort of off to the side. He's standing with 2 other survivors dressed in a striped uniform and a beret, though the image is quite blurry. Blurriness is about right for this ruptured time in his life. After nearly dying from starvation in the camps, he was now getting a bit stronger. While waiting to get out of Germany, he joined the Zionist Kibbutz Yehud and planned to settle in British Palestine until his uncle found him and convinced him to join the family in the United States, saying life would be a little easier for him, and he needed life to be a little easier for him at that time. He was adopted by his aunt and uncle in Brooklyn, where he eventually graduated from college, met my grandmother, lived a long life with his 2 children and 5 grandchildren. And he died just 6 years ago at the age of 93. Some of you may have heard, I've told these stories before. I've told some of them before, and I will again. Though I often struggle to keep telling these stories, or I hesitate. Some people might say it's enough with the horrors of the Holocaust. Move on, focus on the future. Some people say it's morbid, our obsession with the dead. Some people say we have Israel now, so it will never happen again. Never again. But for me, it's not enough, and I won't move on, and we know it wasn't never again. In survivor families like mine, we hesitate to compare anything to the Holocaust. Any other tragedies, the comparisons seem to fail. Those tragedies are so dwarfed by a number like 6 million. But on October 7th, around 1,200 Israelis and foreigners were murdered in an attack by Hamas, including 700 Israeli civilians. The most Jews murdered in a single day, called the darkest day in Jewish history since the end of the Holocaust. It wasn't never again. So today we add those 1,200 to our own memorials, to our own memories. I'll share 3 of those stories of those who died on October 7th. So we can add them today. And we can remember that they are our family too. The first one is Lior ben Yaakov, who was 44 years old. He was a father of 3. In his photo on the Times of Israel website, where you can look, they regularly post new biographies of those who were murdered. In his photo, he looks reliable and calm and determined. In the style of a professional headshot, his arms are folded across his chest, and his body sort of turns and he looks straight into the camera, as if saying, I would be excellent for the job. He was. With his community security team, they fought off the terrorists so that they turned back from their plans to attack Lior's town. He was known as a funny man, loving, a wonderful father, protective, who loved rock, who was kind-hearted, knew everything, a fighter, a strong inside and out. His wife, Revital, said, he's incredibly smart. He was the main parent. He changed the diapers and combed the hair and made the ponytails and packed the bag for kindergarten, made the sandwiches for school, everything, all of it was him. He was murdered while battling Hamas terrorists near his home in Yesha. Carol Simantov was 70 years old, grandmother of 11. In her photo, I would guess she's a happy guest at an outdoor wedding. In a patterned dress and matching earrings, you can see the reflections of the festivities in her eyeglasses, and she looks really hopeful. She was a retired nurse, raised in Levittown, Leviton, Pennsylvania, and made Aliyah to Israel when she was 21 years old and a newlywed and a young mother. She was known as someone who didn't keep the good for herself. She always shared everything generously. She had the best personality and could make you laugh for hours. She was murdered by Hamas terrorists in her home in kibbutz near Oz. That same day, her son and her daughter-in-law and 3 grandchildren were all murdered in their own home in the kibbutz as well. Kim Dukarker was 22 years old, an off-duty border police officer. She was killed while trying to flee the Supernova Music Festival. In her photo, she looks like a superhero. She's marching with other soldiers in uniform, with the clean blue and white of an Israeli flag on her uniform, like a hero's emblem. Her green eyes gaze sideways, as if toward a distant someone in distress. On leave from her policing duties that weekend, Kim attended the dance party with her 2 close friends. When the rocket alarms sounded, they fled from the festival grounds toward kibbutz Be'eri, where they entered a bomb shelter, unaware that the whole area was also awash with infiltrated terrorists. One friend was post-traumatic and terrorized, and she refused to leave the shelter, even when they heard shots outside and knew that their shelter could become a death trap. Someone begged them to leave, but Kim said she couldn't abandon her trembling friend. These stories, together with the hundreds of other stories from that tragic day and the millions of those murdered a century earlier in the Holocaust, these are our family stories. Bear and Pearl and Meyer, Lior and Carol and Kim. We cannot expect the survivors to live forever. Neither can we give their descendants all the work of witnessing and retelling. So whether or not we have a direct family member or someone we know directly who perished in one of these modern tragedies of the Jewish people, it is on all of us to make these stories our own. I'm so grateful to you all for listening today. Together, we must transform the many individual tragedies into our collective memory as Jews. We must take on this shared grief, remembrance, and inheritance if we are to make their memories truly a blessing. Zichronam livracha. Amen.